Excellencies, honorable ministers, distinguished officials, panelists, and participants, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this high-level opening ceremony of the 2018 Global South-South Development Expo. My name is Jorge Chidiek. I'm the director of the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation. As you know, the theme of the Expo this year is showcasing institutions supporting South-South and triangular cooperation. And this in preparation for the second high-level United Nations conference, better known as BAPA Plus 40, that will be hosted by the government of Argentina in Buenos Aires in March of 2019. We have more than 850 registered participants from more than 120 countries. This is a wonderful demonstration of the importance and the interest generated by South-South and triangular cooperation. During the next 3 days, we look forward to learning about the successes of the South, how we can expand South-South cooperation, how to build on the existing partnerships and developing new ones, and how we can all work together to build a better world. Now, we would like to move to the distinguished speakers that are honoring us in this opening segment. And it is now my honor and pleasure to invite the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. António Guterres, to make his remarks. Secretary General, the floor is yours.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed, it is indeed a pleasure for me to join all of you for this 10th Global South-South Development Expo. And I am happy to see many national authorities and Director Generals for Development Cooperation with us. Welcome to New York. As you know, 3 years ago, world leaders adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. It is ambitious, it's transformational, and it simply cannot happen without the ideas, energy, and tremendous ingenuity of the countries of the South. The facts speak for themselves. Southern countries have contributed to more than half of all global growth in recent years. Intra-South trade is higher than ever, accounting for more than 1/4 of all world trade. Foreign direct investment outflows from the South represent 1/3 of global FDI flows. Remittances from migrant workers to low- and middle-income countries reached $466 billion last year, helping to lift millions of families out of poverty. And innovative forms of Southern-led knowledge sharing, technology transfer, emergency response, and livelihood recovery are transforming lives. New financial institutions have helped generate infrastructure and sustainable development projects around the world. And all of this showcases the enormous opportunities emanating from the countries of the South. But I'd like to make here a very important observation. I'm a strong believer in South-South cooperation as a key instrument for the implementation of the Agenda 2030 and for a fair globalization. But South-South cooperation is not meant to replace North-South cooperation, and especially it's not meant to undermine the commitments that were made, namely in the context of the Addis Ababa Plan of Action, by countries of the North. South-South cooperation is an essential tool, but it should not undermine the responsibilities assumed by the Global North in relation to the Agenda 2030 and in relation to global development. All of these showcases the enormous opportunities emanating from countries of the South. At the same time, we know that development gains have been uneven and incomplete. 10% of the world's population still live in extreme poverty, even if we have registered enormous progress, at least in some parts of the world, in the recent past. More than 700 million people are unable to meet basic needs, and climate change and rising inequalities compound these challenges. This Expo is about harnessing the power and potential of the South for the common good. It's about sharing homegrown Southern solutions for sustainable development. We have more than 20 UN entities here highlighting what works. This year's focus on institutions supporting South-South and triangular cooperation is particularly timely, and we look to the 40th anniversary of the Buenos Aires Plan of Action and the second high-level United Nations Conference on South-South cooperation. These are important opportunities to take stock, review lessons learned, and identify new opportunities to advance the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Over the next 4 days, I urge you to seize the opportunity this Expo provides to share the real, lasting changes that take place in the South. Working together, we can forge sustainable strategies to scale up Southern success and help others adapt to their own circumstances. As this Expo shows, there are many creative homegrown solutions to eradicate poverty and achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Let us strive together to accelerate progress towards the SDGs. And let us put a special focus on empowering women and expanding opportunities for young people. And let us make the most of Southern successes for the people of the South and indeed for the world. Thank you, and I wish you a very productive and rewarding Expo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General, for setting the tone for this year's Expo. Now it is my honor and pleasure to invite Her Excellency Ms. María Fernández Pinoza Garcés, President of the 73rd session of the United Nations General Assembly, to give her remarks. Señora Presidente.
Madam President, thank you very much and good morning. Secretary General, colleagues, the panel, dear ministers and heads of states and authorities that are here with us today. Excellencies, it's an honor to participate in the opening of this Global Expo to celebrate the results of solidarity and fraternal relationships between countries that share similar challenges. This is even more important because we are celebrating the 10th anniversary of this Expo, and also we are at the doors of the second high-level conference of the United Nations on South-South cooperation that will be held in Argentina next March. This is a key moment to reflect on the path that we've taken during the last 40 years of the Action Plan of Buenos Aires and to identify the challenges that we still must meet. Excellencies, dear friends, first of all, let me point out that we are at an optimal moment of South-South relationships that are shown by the economic development of southern countries in the last few years. Exports, South-South exports have grown at an annual rate of 13% between 1995 and 2016. They exceeded world exports by 8%. The value of South-South trade increased almost 7 times. It went from $0.6 billion in 1995 to $4 billion in 2016. Good relationships in the South can also be seen in cooperation. Between 2015 and 2017, the proportion of the countries in the Global South that provide cooperation for development increased from 63% to 74%. The awakening of these countries of the Global South have contributed to emerging economies and are modifying the economic and trade patterns at a world scale. This would have not been possible without the clear advances that we've seen internally in these countries. This responds to the implementation of innovative policies in critical areas for development to fight poverty, health services, and quality education. We still see great challenges, but this Global Expo allows us to showcase the creativity of the people of the South in order to initiate these policies and implement them. We also must increase and deepen South-South cooperations framed in the new development paradigms. From the time we approved the action plan in Buenos Aires, the world has experienced deep changes at leapfrog steps. We are part of a multipolar and interdependent world today. International cooperation must also reflect this reality and respond to the 2030 development agenda, as the Secretary General just pointed out. In the next conference in Buenos Aires will be key to renew the basis of international cooperation, reaffirming that South-South cooperation complements rather than substitute traditional cooperation. Under this premise, the countries of the South, our other partners, and the United Nations system must work together to enrich exchange of experiences and good practices, increase cooperation areas, and find solutions that are creative to the obstacles and persistent challenges ahead. This way, we could open up the doors of a more inclusive cooperation that could substantially contribute to sustainable social development. Thirdly, South-South cooperation strengthens multilateralism and regional integrations and facilitates a space for the exchange solidarity that could help bring countries of the South closer and to strengthen their relationships. The horizontal character of South-South cooperation feeds the need to cooperate among each other, convinced that joint efforts could facilitate more efficient and sustainable solutions. After all, regional integration and multilateralism are the only way to overcome the regional and global challenges such as eradication of poverty, hunger, decent work, empowering of women and girls, the protection of the environment, promoting health and education, among many others. Knowing that South-South cooperation is a model for world alliances to reach the sustainable development goals, so multilateralism is doubly strengthened. Excellencies, to conclude, allow me to tell you that as a citizen of the Global South, I feel very, very proud of what South-South cooperation represents. It is an alternative view as to how to move forward towards development, helping others, cooperating with others for mutual benefit and complementarity. We know that each one of us can contribute, and beyond resources, the political will is essential to make a difference. This is why I am certain of the immense potential that South-South cooperation offers. The key is to take advantage of this now. I trust this event will renew interest in this new way of cooperating and to increase and deepen exchanges among countries of the South, and to encourage developed countries and other actors to contribute their experiences and to the successful experiences of the Global South. My best wishes for these next few days, and you have my full support. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, señora Presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, for your intervention.
Speaker, His Excellency Ambassador Hani Selim, Assistant Foreign Minister for International Cooperation for Development of the Arab Republic of Egypt, the current chair of the Group of 77 and China. Ambassador Selim, the floor is yours.
Después de toda la sabiduría y
After all this wisdom that we've just heard by the Secretary General and the President of the General Assembly, it's hard to follow. However, let me try, and I hope I am successful.
Ms. Maria Fernanda Espinosa Garces, President of the 73rd Session of the General Assembly, Mr. António Guterres, United Nations Secretary General, Mr. Achim Steiner, Administrator of the United Nations Development Programme, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I would like to thank the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation for organizing this important and timely event in preparation for the second high-level United Nations Conference on South-South Cooperation, BAPA Plus 40. The 10th Annual Global South-South Development Expo represents an opportunity to exchange experience, views, and success stories of South-South cooperation with a view to promoting solutions that could contribute in the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. It also helps in the process of preparation for the upcoming Buenos Aires Plan of Action Plus 40 conference. The forthcoming conference is the opportunity to enhance South-South cooperation and to identify the proper ways to harness it for achieving the 2030 Agenda and eradicating poverty in all its forms and dimensions. Buenos Aires Plan of Action Plus 40 conference will take place against a very particular backdrop. In the last few decades, South-South cooperation has experienced a remarkable expansion at all levels, brought together a great variety of actors, and earned important placement in the international cooperation agenda. In this regard, South-South cooperation deserves its own separate and independent promotion. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, South-South cooperation is a collective effort of the developing countries. It must remain a manifestation of solidarity among peoples and countries of the South, building on their needs, experience, capabilities, best practices, diversified culture, and many other circumstances and conditions. It has been taking place in a wide range of areas in support of the development process of the developing countries, which contributes to their national well-being, national and collective self-reliance, and to the achievement of the SDGs. South-South cooperation is a complement to and not a substitute for North-South cooperation. It seems that we have to underline this fact more and more again. It should continue to be guided by the principles of respect for national sovereignty, national ownership and independence, equality, non-conditionality, non-interference in domestic affairs, and mutual benefit. While being complement to but not substituting North-South cooperation, South-South cooperation leads to more diverse opportunities for development, assistance, and cooperation. It offers viable opportunities for the developing countries in their individual and collective pursuit of sustained economic growth and sustainable development. The establishment of the United Nations Office on South-South cooperation represents an important incremental step for supporting South-South cooperation within the United Nations development system. The Office has done a commendable work, especially in networking and making known various forms and instances of South-South cooperation within the United Nations and the United Nations system, as well as in and among the developing countries. However, a major strategic effort and thinking is called for on how to strengthen the support by the United Nations and by the international community for this form of development cooperation. In this context, we call upon the United Nations development system to continue mainstreaming and enhancing its support to South-South and triangular cooperation at the request and with the ownership and leadership of the developing countries through a system-wide approach. I thank you very much for attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Selim. And now, Mr. Secretary General, we are aware of the effort you and your team made to accommodate this event in the agenda, but now we're aware that you have to proceed to another meeting. So thank you very much for coming and for your commitment to supporting South-South cooperation. Please, and a round of applause for our Secretary. It is now my honor to ask the Administrator of the United Nations Development Programme, Mr. Achim Steiner, to give his remarks. But before, I want to highlight and thank Mr. Steiner for his personal commitment to South-South cooperation and for his commitment to the support UNDP provides to our office that is hosted by the organization, and thank you very much, and thank you very much for being here. The floor is yours, Mr. Steiner.
Thank you very much, Jorge, President of the General Assembly, His Excellency Ambassador Hani Salim, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. You have already heard a great deal of what I would have also spoken to about South-South cooperation, so I will simply align myself with the speech of the PGA, the Secretary General, and also you, Ambassador, because the fundamental orientation, relevance, and centrality of South-South cooperation finds one of its expressions in the United Nations, certainly in the mission, the mandate, and the reality of our work in the United Nations Development Programme today. So for me, this is a very easy speech to not only deliver to you, but as I walked over here with my colleagues in UNDP, I was challenging them also, because clearly South-South cooperation is not a static phenomenon. It is wonderful to welcome all of you here to New York to this South-South Expo, because many of you in this hall and who are participating in this Expo are in fact on the front lines of developing the platforms, the networks, the innovations, and also the strategies and lessons learned that drive South-South cooperation. In that sense, we welcome you warmly here, as we do in these expos regularly, and I in fact had the great pleasure to at the time be a co-host during my years in Nairobi of the first South-South Expo, ironically ever being hosted in the South. So it is also perhaps a reminder that coming to New York and then in regular intervals also taking the Expo into the frontiers of South-South cooperation is a good thing to do. My reason for also saying to you and to my colleagues this morning, so what is it that is actually changing? Because if we are simply trading on the established South-South cooperation, do we need to get together in these fora? Because our colleagues every day across the world clearly are engaged in South-South cooperation. It's a massively expanding part of the global knowledge network and partnership platform that is driving development. Now, clearly, as you will see as you are here, the fundamental principles that this is not an alternative, but rather an augmentation and an amplification of those elements that we can draw on in global development cooperation, that they also must evolve in line with the agendas such as Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals, but also, for example, Africa's Agenda 2063. These are orientation points that must influence also the way that we develop our portfolio of South-South cooperation. When I asked my colleagues this morning in my speech, there is very little about the actual quantitative dimension of UNDP's work in South-South cooperation. I was given this graphic. I'm sorry, I can only lift it up right now, but I will put it on the UNDP website later today. Essentially, it is a mapping, like the airlines have in the back of their airline magazines, of their route network. And you would be fascinated. This is UNDP's South-South cooperation footprint in 2017, and the numbers are really quite impressive. Over 476 initiatives across 127 countries, clearly principally involving national government agencies with whom we connect and who we connect, but also the private sector, civil society, academics and universities, centers of research. The work of UNDP today is unthinkable without South-South cooperation. That is why I always say it is part of the fabric and the mandate and actually the deliverables of the UN's development program as part of the UN development system and the family of sister agencies who, in fact, would say the same thing. So where does this take us? First of all, to deepening our capacity to be a platform for connection and for networking. UNDP, I would argue, is in the development arena probably one of the premier platforms for connecting countries. That is why we have this extraordinary graphic here that shows the traffic that uses the platform of a United Nations Development Program to connect. It also works with trilateral cooperation, but certainly South-South cooperation has become ever more significant in our work. And it is sometimes interesting to trace innovations also. We sometimes talk about, for instance, Kenya's leadership in terms of electronic payment platforms and using digital technology to create inclusive finance opportunities. When you trace the famous evolution of M-Pesa, there are many fathers and mothers who claim to have actually been the origin of it. Interesting enough, it's not just technology. It was also a regulatory and policy decision in Kenya at the time to allow such a platform to emerge in order to create inclusive finance opportunities where traditionally it would be the formal banking system that would have been relied on. Bangladesh is another wonderful example that I recently learned about with the Access to Information Initiative, a wonderful, cutting-edge example of how an innovation that began in another part of the UNDP family actually has today become one of the great examples of how to use digital and technologies and platforms to reach literally the last citizen in a community, in a nation. I mention these only because they are illustrative of the frontiers of innovation that are now driving development and that very often actually have their origin in the south, not in the north. It may use some technology, it may use some expertise, but in our work in UNDP, I certainly have the impression that that is a rapidly emerging reality. So as we move towards BAPA plus 40, our expectation is that it will re-articulate, first of all, the principles of South-South cooperation, but also the alignment with the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs, which is clearly critical for us in the UN family to have as a joint direction setting. But secondly, also further create the momentum that will allow the UN system, alongside each one of your countries, governments, and the many government institutions, to create the platforms on which this kind of cooperation is possible. More and more countries are also engaging, this is our experience in UNDP, in trilateral cooperation, where we become a third partner between two countries finding a way to work together on development frontiers. These are models that I urge you in the days that you're here in New York also to take a closer look, because for some of you, they may already be established practice, for others, they may be entirely new. Let me end my speech by simply saying that in our UN family and in the UN development system, and specifically for UNDP, I can assure you that what you are looking at during these days here in New York at the Expo, during the Expo on South-South cooperation, what we're looking at towards Buenos Aires next year is central to the work and the commitment of our institution to the idea of South-South cooperation. We will simply not advance the development agenda if you were not to invest in it, rely on it, and through the global policy network that we are building up in UNDP, provide the platform and connectivity that I think many of you are looking for and will find extremely effective. Thank you once again, and thank you also to the UN Office for South-South Cooperation. Hosted since, I think, 1974 in UNDP, it is part of why I think UNDP has imbued and internalized these ideas so effectively. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Administrator. And your words conclude the opening statements and very inspired statements we received this morning in the opening session. And I would like to invite all of you to give a big round of applause and thanks to the President of the General Assembly, Minister.